Greetings, everyone. Darrius here, and today we're going to continue our series on the future trends in pen testing. If you've watched the previous episode, you saw Brad and I discuss the importance of keeping track and looking at future trends within the industry, as well as some things that we see becoming more prevalent, such as the use of newer languages such as Rust, Nim, and Go, as well as just kind of an increase in certain TTPs such as token theft and just cloud usage and things of that nature. And so today we're going to follow that up. And this time we have the man who needs no introduction, our very own Spencer. How you doing today?
Good. What's going on, Darrius?
Yeah,
Looking
I'm
forward
doing
to it.
great. Yeah, I think it's kind of a busy week for both of us. So I'm glad we're able to sit some time
Yep.
down to record this.
Yeah, it's the Q4 rush. The snow is falling in New York State here where I live, and so are the pen test engagements. So looking forward to chatting. I haven't been on the podcast in a couple weeks, so that's interesting. You might not have heard my voice in the last couple weeks unless you follow me on LinkedIn, in which case you hear a lot of me. So I'm excited to talk about future trends.
Yeah. So before we even jump into it, kind of how we started out last week is why is it important to kind of stay on top and see what's coming?
Yeah, so for me, the industry is always changing, right? And there's something that I always say that we always say internally and we talk about all the time is the more things change, the more they stay the same. But at the same time, there's new techniques being released. There was just a talk that somebody gave at Black Hat EU about new process injection techniques that are fully undetectable by all the top EDRs. It was just released like last weekend or Friday or something like that. So things are constantly changing. Things are constantly evolving. There's new techniques. There's new threats. There's new exploits. There's new threat groups and everything in between. So for me, it's important to stay on top of that thing, on top of that stuff, so you know what's happening, so that if you come across it in an engagement or if a client asks, you have knowledge of what's going on and you know kind of how to respond to that. So those are kind of some of my thoughts of why it's important. I think by the nature of what we do, it's a constantly evolving game, and we always have to constantly improve and constantly get better, and increase our skills and our knowledge and our tradecraft and things like that. And that's something we'll talk about later on, I think, is R&D. But I think it's always important to continually evolve with the technology or with the industry that you're in. Otherwise, you just get left behind, right, Darius? There's going to be new things, new techniques that come out, new exploits, new vulnerabilities. And if you're not keeping pace with that, you're eventually going to get left behind.
Yep, agreed. I think it's just the nature of the beast, and it's kind of I think we said it on the last podcast. It's a cat and mouse game. I think it just goes for the cyber security industry as a whole, regardless of if you're a red teamer, whether you're in a SOC, whether you're dealing with GRC, you're going to have to adapt and keep up with what's new in order to stay relevant.
Yeah, especially when it comes to like evasion, which is something I'm very curious about and passionate about. I do internal assessments, assume breach, and evasion is one of those things that comes up time and time again. And a technique that is, not detected or is a bypass today, will be detected tomorrow. Or new techniques, like I said, will get introduced. They'll be able to be used for a little while, and then vendors will catch up and they'll be able to detect those things. So you have to adapt. So that stuff is really interesting to me.
Cool. Well, so let's dive right into, I guess, some of the future trends. And the first one is the I guess, increase, because we've had it for about a year or so, and it's been released to the public for about a year or so now, is an increase in AI, large language models, and GPTs.
Yeah. So the thing that's interesting to me is the pen testing applications of it that we've seen so far haven't been super novel. Like we were just talking about one the other day about this pen test tool that somebody had created, and it was essentially just prompts to ChatGPT's AI or API, right? So I think one of the things that is interesting to me about that is there's a lot of potential for those AIs and those LLMs and those GPTs and all those other things. I think there's a lot of potential for that to help the pen testing process, to make it better, and things like that. So that's a trend I know, we can all kind of bet money that will continue, right? AI is kind of the new thing. It's AI summer, kind of like NFT summer, if you're familiar with that terminology. This is AI summer. We're going through it right now, and eventually it'll tail off. And then, there'll be more stuff that gets developed. But I think one of the things that's interesting to me is how can we use it to improve our process, to improve our understanding of a target, to help sift through large amounts of information and kind of prioritize certain paths during an attack or things like that. So that's something that's interesting to me that kind of comes to mind when I think about trends is we'll definitely see that being used. It's just a matter of how well it's going to be used in the immediate near future. But that's something that will definitely change the way we pen test for sure, without a doubt. It will change the way we pen test. It'll change our workflows and hopefully enhance it for the better.
I can agree with that. And if you know me, I personally think this AI summer, a lot of it is slightly overhyped.
For sure.
In terms of, I do think, as far as from a developer standpoint, now is a great time to get some stuff out on your portfolio, because you get, look, open API, they have it available. Mm-hmm. You write a couple of prompts, make a couple of API calls, boom, you have a project. And that's something that you can, have in your toolkit that can be useful in certain circumstances. I'm going to go take it from a different approach in terms of, I think one of the ways that we can kind of see AI kind of infecting the industry, and it's something that we talk about a lot, is with soft skills, where, you have some guys and gals that are extremely technical, but when it comes to those soft skills and interacting with people, that's where they may struggle a little bit. And I think that's where AI can definitely come in, whether it's, hey, you have all these notes that are written down, and now you can use, this language model to essentially take your notes and format them into a digestible format for your client or your target audience and demographic. I think that's where presently we can see, the advantages today, honestly, if implemented correctly. I will say, though, and we've done a little bit of testing internally. We tried out a couple different tools from a technical standpoint. We're on the horizon, but I don't think we're there just yet. I know in terms of like Test GPT and some of these other tools, I think, so far they're decent from a low hanging fruit, some of the basics. But once you start getting into real world and more advanced scenarios, they're not really as helpful. But I think that's where, from if you're a beginner or junior pen tester, these tools can really help you kind of understand what you're looking at. And I think that's where the advantages are presently.
Yeah, I think about AI, so the way I think about AI is the way I think about any pen testing tool that's new, that's just released. If you're not using it or playing around with it, you're falling behind. I think when it comes to pen testing, I think you should have a wide range of experience with a lot of different technologies, a lot of different tools. And I get into this debate all the time about, what's the best platform for pen testing or what's the best platform to pen test on, Kali or Windows or Parrot or Linux or whatever, or what are the best pen testing tools, CrackMap Exec, which is now NetExec, or do you use C# tooling, or do you use PowerShell, and all these debates of what's the best platform for pen testing. I think you have to taste these things. I think now is a good opportunity. If you're, like you said, you're a junior, you're getting into the field, or you're looking to make a move, you're looking to get a new position somewhere else. I think it's a good opportunity to be a first mover, to get that first mover advantage, to play with the technology, implement something and test and learn. And I think that's the important thing now, is because AI will be a huge, huge part of our industry going forward. And if you're playing with it now and getting those skills, it might not be OpenAI's ChatGPT, it might not be Grok or whatever it is, that we're using 10 years from now, but those skills that you learn now will be very beneficial for when you actually need to use it, 10 years from now.
Agreed. So I guess
one last thing is the language stuff you were talking about. I think it's really cool that applications use now, because you can tell it, write this summary for this finding and make it, write it in a professional tone, or write it in the tone of a pirate or whatever you want to do, right? And it's a language model. So you take, your text and, write it in this tone or use this type of language is something that's pretty neat.
Yeah, and I mean, we're using it, or at least we're using it a little bit in terms of, I think, I created a custom GPT to do exactly that, to take my scratch notes and just ramblings in my head, and to kind of help format a good starting point for some of the reports. So it's here. So there's definitely some good to it.
Um,
Go ahead.
I think you're going to hit on it next, but when it comes to language and stuff like that, I know you want to talk about like pretexting and phishing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That is, if we're talking about future trends, like I definitely see that being something that's going to be more and more powerful as even with video and voice and stuff. I know you want to talk about that.
Yeah.
We're getting to a point now where I look at an image on the internet or even a video now, and I'm like, I don't know if that's real. There's pictures, there's videos, and I'm like, I'm not quite sure, because of the technology and where it's gotten and how far it's advanced. I'm not quite sure the stuff that I'm looking at, is necessarily real, or it's a real human, or it's the real person talking and things like that. And you're going to be able to translate your voice in real time to another language seamlessly. The mouth movement's going to match up and everything. So there's definitely huge advancements on the horizon.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw the tweet, but there's one person that basically said, hey, in the future, what you'll have is, if you wanted to do something, nefarious on camera and not get caught, you can buy a ring that looks like an extra like finger. And so that way, when they record you, they're like, oh no, that's AI. There's an extra finger. That's what I mean.
No, yeah, people are going to start subtly watermarking their videos or their content or their images, or putting some sort of identifying mark, like it's an Easter egg in their content, so that they can point to it and be like, no, that actually is me, because this little like pixel here, or like this watermark here. I definitely think that's going to have to happen, or there's going to have to be some other way to prove that is a valid source, or that's the original content, or that's not a reproduction, or it's not an AI generated thing. So we're definitely going to have those struggles.
And I feel like AI can't be the answer for detecting other AI.
It's going to be too, though. It is. It's like, oh, we have these deepfake videos, and we're going to use AI to tell if these deepfake videos are fake.
And then now the two AI models are training each other, and it's just it goes from there.
But that's a good point when it comes to AI. I know this is not a complete AI episode, but the model pollution, I think, is very real, right? So when we talk about future trends, and we're seeing this with Grok, which is Twitter's AI that they just released. They trained it on, open source, or I think they trained part of it, or at least some of it, on OpenAI's model. So the stuff they get from their model, they had trained it on that model, or trained that model on another model. So essentially what I'm saying is, these AI models are getting trained by other models potentially, or by other data that's been produced by other AI models, that's been influenced by other data, right? So we have this pipeline, this chain of data that's being trained and trained and trained. And I think we'll see the model pollution or data pollution, whatever the industry wants to call it, that I think will be a very real threat to AI and to those things, because it's only as good as the data that goes in. And how well it's trained. And that gets into local models, which we talk about a lot internally, right? If we're going to develop a tool for pen testing that uses AI or uses our company data in any way, we want to have a local model. We want to train it ourselves, keep it contained. So I think the organizations or the people that create, DIY local models and like sell that, I think is going to be $1 billion industry. People who create, here, download this and create your own local model and train it this way, I think is going to be a big thing, and something that we need to be cautious of from a security standpoint as well. So yeah,
I can agree, and we're seeing a little bit of all that. I don't want to keep on AI for too long, but you're seeing a little bit of that already with like Llama, and what Facebook has kind of allowed people to do in terms of kind of generating their own local models. So yeah, definitely we'll see an increase in that, and it kind of goes back to the conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, where it's like, like with most new technology, it's just it's the cycle of, it's going to get big, and then eventually it's going to get censored, and it's not going to work as great as what it used to. And so what do people do? Well, we're
Yep.
going to go develop our own. And just, the cycle will just continue over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's like cryptocurrency. It's like everything is centralized until it's not, then it's decentralized because everybody, they don't want to rely on a single point of failure or a single, regulatory body or anything like that. So it's decentralized. So I see AI following that trend as well, Darius.
So cool. I think next we have just automated / continuous pen testing. I think with that we can see a little bit of that kind of emerging as a future trend. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think especially with the prevalence of the AI tools to kind of help supplement that, we are definitely going to see an increase in continuous or automated quote unquote pen testing services. I do think much like the pen testing tools that we have now, I don't think it's very novel. I think it could be a good way for organizations to take vulnerability scanning up kind of a half a notch, if you will, using continuous or automated scanning, using modern like pen testing techniques. You can probably find a lot of low-hanging fruit that a vulnerability scanner like Nessus won't be able to find. But I do think that it's still going to miss the mark on what pen testing actually is, which is manual validation, manual verification of impact, of blast radius, what it actually means, and kind of manually validating, especially when it comes to multiple chains of attacks. Like you have to do one thing and then use it with it here and then use it again. So a lot of Active Directory attacks, especially, it's not just, click and exploit. It's not like SQL injection where you run the payload and then, you execute the command. Active Directory exploits many times are, relying on a couple different things, and you have to do several things. For example, certificate abuse. You have to request a certificate, to download the certificate, convert it. You have to request a Kerberos ticket. You have to use it. There's a lot of steps involved in that. And with that example, you could certainly automate some of that. But some of the other attacks, I think it's more difficult to automate because of the manual intervention that's needed. You need that manual thought process behind what am I trying to do and how do I do it? And it's applicable to this specific scenario and it requires context. So my high level thoughts are I think it will continue. I think there'll be first movers in the automated continuous space, but I do think that it's still going to be not very novel in the way we think about pen testing. And I think it's only going to help very marginally for the organizations that want it. And, lastly, I think the organizations that can afford it probably don't need it. You know what I mean? Because I think right now, automated, continuous, all that stuff is very expensive. So I think the organizations that need it or the organizations that can afford it probably don't need it right now.
Yeah. So I think you hit the nail on the head. I think I guess I'm often kind of the skeptic of our group. And so, I definitely don't think it's a replacement for pen testing, but I do think it can be helpful for basically finding and addressing some of the low hanging fruit. At the end of the day, it's a glorified vulnerability scan, but I definitely think that people are going to market it. And then once you attach the, AI moniker onto it, you're going to be able to charge a lot of money for it and just go from there.
Yep.
I think kind of my interesting thing is this idea of like automated / continuous pen testing isn't new. And I look at it more so from a DevSecOps perspective, right? Where there are plenty of companies right now and they're doing this relatively cheaply too, where it's just like, hey, as a part of our pipeline, we have these security checks in place where we're going to do a SAS scan and a DAS scan, and there's all these other, tools automatically into the process before we even push to, production on every single PR. So it already exists,
Yep.
in my opinion. It's just I think now it's going to be prepackaged and
Yep.
maybe a little bit more more broad than just hey you're developing software yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wasn't in the industry when vulnerability scanners first came out, like when Nessus was first created or Nmap and like stuff like that. So when those first came out, I'm sure there was conversations, and it'd be interesting to hear from somebody who's very tenured and like has been in this for tens and 20s of years, because security as it exists today is still very relatively new in the context of larger security, computer security, and stuff like that. But I would imagine the conversations they're having today are the same that they had back then. It was like, imagine if we could do automated vulnerability scanning, you know, like imagine. And I think in 10 years from now, we'll look back and we'll be like, imagine if we could do automated whatever, and
Yeah.
we'll be doing automated pen testing or whatever. So I think that trend will continue. I think I think it comes down to the rush to the bottom, right? I think all this comes down to like getting, how can we get the least expensive pen test possible and do it at scale, right? How can we lower the bar, make it as extremely inexpensive as possible, but scale it out? And I think by doing that, you kind of, like you said, it's glorified and it ends up diluting the value of that assessment to some extent.
100%. And like I said, I don't. At that point, it's not a pen test, in my opinion. Man, I won't get into it too much, but yeah, when you approach
Yeah,
it from that perspective, you lose sight of what the actual purpose of the engagement is supposed to be.
for sure.
Um, so, I guess if you're trying, I guess for those who are just trying to check the box off for the year,
Yep.
congratulations. But for those who are really trying to, identify the risk in their environment and to, patch the gaps, for lack of a better term, then yeah, you're going to want what I would consider an actual real penetration test.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So I think the last thing we have is research and development. And this is one, I think this is a really good one. So interested in hearing your thoughts on it.
Yeah. So I think R&D is a trend that will, to me, it's obvious. But for those that don't do pen testing all day or don't have kind of a foot in kind of the offensive operations on a day-to-day basis, I'll kind of try to articulate why. With the prevalence of EDR, with the prevalence of other monitoring systems and other security software, those systems are getting really good. There's no debate really that, EDR products and SIM products and other security products are getting better. They're catching more attacks, they're catching more techniques, they're getting better at generating telemetry, ingesting those events, and creating actionable alerts and detections on those things. So security products are getting better. The blue team is getting better, right? Defenders are getting more educated on these attacks and these techniques. There's more investment in the industry to create products and to teach people how to get better at this and to teach people the techniques that are required to detect these attacks and these techniques. So I think the bar is getting increasingly higher and higher and higher in the information security industry, offensive security, right? So it's getting harder to do our jobs. And I think, the offensive security industry, for better or for worse, right? They're helping the industry improve. I really think the offensive security industry has done a lot to improve the security of organizations. But in doing so, we're kind of putting ourselves out of a job, right? We're making organizations harder to attack. Security products are getting better. Defenders are getting better. So in order to provide value to our clients or to provide value on an engagement, we have to get better as offensive security people. So we can't just do the same things that we did 10 years ago and they're going to work. We can't just copy and paste stuff off of GitHub anymore and it'll work. Like there's somebody I interact on Twitter, Justin Elzy from Trusted Sec, and his common phrase that I like to use is copy paste pwn. I've heard him say that a couple times. So you can't just copy paste pwn from GitHub anymore and expect everything to work. So I think R&D, research and development, is very important to what we do, and it's integral to how we operate because defenders are getting better, security is getting better. So in order to provide value, we need to get better. So, and if we're not getting better, we're falling behind, we're providing less value, we're being less effective, and ultimately, clients are going to suffer because we're not going to be providing as the value that we can for them. So those are my kind of introductory thoughts on that.
Yeah. And I guess kind of where my mind immediately goes is you're 100% right. But I kind of think about it from the perspective of offensive security and red teaming in general has always kind of been a small, specialized group in terms of the industry as a whole. And so now that things are getting more complex, you're having to learn some of this technology and TTPs on a very, very deep level. To your point, like I think about the fact that it used to be if you could do some basic, if you understood basic PowerShell, you could cause a lot of havoc, right? And you could just copy scripts online. But now it's getting to the point to where you really need to know things from a Windows perspective, right? You really need to know things at a very, very deep level. You need to know if you're trying to, do invasion and get around things. You need to know, the Win API calls and how to make them. And also, if you really want to get by, like we said in the previous episode, do it in a different language. And so I just kind of look at my immediate thought kind of goes to the barrier to entry. Now that things are becoming more and more and more complex, what does the future look like for future pen testers? Because as we know, we've had this conversation before, a lot of the training and certifications out there don't keep track with what's actually happening in the real world. And so, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see.
Yep.
Yeah, what it takes to kind of break into red teaming and offensive security in the future.
Yeah, and offensive security, red teaming, pen testing, that's the sexy job that everybody wants to do, right? It's the breaking and entering, it's the hacking, it's that kind of thing. So it's more attractive to a wider audience than the blue team stuff, than doing GRC and audits and compliance work, or defending in general, or being a sysadmin. Offensive security is seen as being more cool and more trendy and more fun. Whether that's the case or not, the fact of the matter is, like you said, it's becoming more popular as an industry, as a trade. And because of that, there's more people getting into it. There's more tools being developed. There's more stuff being released on the internet, in terms of POCs. There's more people doing research. So it naturally has to progress. The R&D that we invest into it will be a trend that continues, especially when we consider, a lot of professional red teams will not release stuff publicly. They're keeping their tooling internal in-house, because as soon as they start releasing it, there's going to be a ton of people using it and it's going to get burned, right? So a lot of teams now are developing teams in-house, or they're buying products and customizing them, or they're just buying products and using them and that kind of thing. There's a couple different ways I think people are using that or doing R&D, but I see a trend of keeping all that stuff in-house as opposed to kind of keeping it, developing in-house and sharing it, because a lot of stuff gets burned once you do that. So I think that trend of developing an R&D team specifically to do R&D, or to buy products and customize them for yourself and keep them internal, is definitely a trend that will continue. But I think it's a necessary thing. I think R&D, we spend a lot of time doing R&D. We try to, but I think it's something that will definitely continue.
And I think it's interesting that you say, keeping it in-house. That I think it's going to be tough, because as we know, with a lot of people in the industry, oftentimes it's the race to be the first. It's like, hey, look at this thing I found, and completely, blows this product wide open. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the future.
And there are people in the information security community who think everything should be free. They think training should be free, tools should be public, CVE should be public, all things on the table. There are people in the industry that think that everything should be on the table. I don't know if I'm necessarily in that camp. I don't know where I sit on the fence necessarily when it comes to like publicly releasing exploits or proof of concepts for things that are in the wild. I'm not exactly sure where I sit on that. It's a very gray area. That's a heated debate for a lot of people, right? Responsible disclosure and POCs and stuff like that. But my point is, there are people who believe that everything should be free and wide open. There are people that believe that nothing should be. Everything should be behind closed doors. I think the answer is somewhere in the gray. But I do see the trend continuing where we're going to have a camp that publicly releases stuff all the time, and we're going to have a camp that keeps stuff internal all the time. And there's going to be a few people, a minority in the middle, kind of doing both, I think. And I think the world has become polarized, so that makes sense, right? That we're going to have polarized opposites for OffSec, right? Closed source, open source, and then there's going to be a clash of that internally. But
the debate as old as time, right?
yeah, it's the OST debate, over again, essentially. But we release stuff publicly sometimes. There's a lot of stuff we keep internally. I think it's a trade-off, right? If you find that you're not using a technique as often or it's not as effective, maybe you release it, right? And you put out something to the community. You share your knowledge or experience with the community. Hey, I learned this. It's not as effective anymore, so we're going to release it. But stuff that is effective, like specific techniques you've developed or tradecraft, that's stuff that you can leverage to provide value to your clients. So it makes sense that you would keep that internally. It makes sense that you would develop upon that, do more research in that to provide more value to your clients, to be more effective and things like that.
100%. Well, that's all we have for you today, guys. Thanks for listening and watching. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, subscribe, all the buttons and all the things that you can do. It really helps us out, and we appreciate it, especially sharing our content as well. And until next time, hope everyone has a great week and a great holiday.